over the course of this video and the next video, I'm going to unpack information about the thesis, the conceptual evidence, the concept statements, and textual evidence. So, to begin with, a conceptual essay is structured around a central argument called a thesis. The argument is supported by conceptual evidence that is broken down into steps which are based on concept statements. The textual evidence supports each concept statement. First of all, I'm going to have a bit of a look at the relationship between the question and thesis. Most confusion seems to come from this word thesis. In simple terms, it's just your main argument, the main argument that you're putting forward in your response. So to understand how this works, you first have to understand that there is no single right answer when you're writing an essay in English. There are usually many right answers. But don't be fooled, because there are definitely wrong answers. One way to make this a little clearer is to answer a question that's often asked in regards to the thesis and question. A lot of students ask, isn't a thesis just a rewording of the question? And the answer to that is no, it's not just a rewording of the question. And as we go through this, you'll start to understand why. But I'll give you a little example first to help you understand why that's problematic, why you can't just reword the question. Consider this following example. Imagine that you go up to a friend and you're looking to get them something for their birthday. So it's really important that you get them something that they like. So you ask them, what's your favorite color? And their answer is the color that I like the most. Technically speaking, it answers the question, but it's also an example of rewording the question. And the result is that when asking them about their favorite color, you're not actually finding that out. And that's what tends to happen if you take this attitude of simply rewording the question. You're going to end up in a bit of a vicious circle, so that you never actually say anything. What is a thesis then? How does this idea of a thesis work? So your thesis is a statement that best captures what you have learnt as a result of studying the unit or module. Basically, the thesis is what you should be providing when you answer that question, what is your favorite color? Rather than saying the color that I like the most, your thesis is like saying red or blue or turquoise. So it's the one most important thing that you've taken away from your study, and summing that up in a statement. Put it this way. Your job is to show that your thesis is one of those possible answers using evidence. Okay, so I'm going to go through an analogy now to help you understand this relationship between question and thesis and how that fits together when you put it into a conceptual essay, how you organize that in an essay. Writing an essay for English is like taking someone from one physical location to another, and your conceptual argument is the specific route you take to get there. One thing that you have to understand is that when you're going from one place to another, there's always a map available. So even if you can make the trip without ever referring to it, the borders of the map are basically a unit of work, or what's sometimes called a module. This is more specifically defined in senior English in something called a rubric. Every day you manage to get to school without using a map. But if you recorded your journey using some form of GPS tracking, it would show the roads that you followed to get there. There's always a map or a boundary. And that's really what the unit or the module does. It kind of gives us some kind of limitation in terms of what we're going to focus on. Because just like a map, you could try and cover more and more. But we need to make sure that we're only looking at the part of the map that is most relevant to our study. Alright, so how does this idea of the journey and a map fit into this idea of a question and a thesis? So the question is your point of origin. It's where you start. And it will always be within the boundaries of the map. That's because the question always has to come from the unit of work or from the rubric. And in the sense of it being your point of origin, it's a little bit like the Amazing Race or a scavenger hunt where everyone starts at exactly the same point. So then If the question is your starting point, the thesis is your destination. It's where you are taking your reader. So again, like with a scavenger hunt, you all start at the same place, but the treasure everyone finds is different and can be located in a variety of different places, because as long as all the items on your scavenger hunt list meet the criteria for your scavenger hunt, they don't have to be exactly the same, so they don't have to be in exactly the same places. That's part of the reason why your thesis is uniquely yours. It's because it represents what you've learnt in the unit of work. Kind of like the culmination or endpoint of your learning in the particular unit of work. And so, to continue with this analogy, the main intersections along the way of your journey are the steps in your conceptual argument. They're the points where you choose to take one route or another. And each of those intersections is like the beginning of a new paragraph. And just like on a journey, at the beginning of a new paragraph, you decide which direction you are going to head next. Those decisions determine whether or not you get to your destination. And whether or not it's a prepared one or one that you're doing under exam conditions, you should always come into an essay knowing your thesis before you are given the question, because then you just have to work out how to get from your point of origin to your destination. It's very hard to know how to get somewhere if you don't know where you're going. And because the journey has to stay within the borders of the map, you can always get back to your thesis no matter where the question is. So you can see in each of these maps, the point of origin is different, but they all end up in the same place, the thesis. Like any other journey, there's usually more than one route from your point of origin to your destination, and that's what we see in both of these maps. They have the same starting point and destination, but there's more than one way that you can get there. So in two essays, both with the same thesis and the same question, you could actually provide very different arguments based on a different set of concepts. But as long as you get from the question to your thesis, you've successfully communicated your ideas. So ultimately, you're trying to prove your thesis, and if it has come from the unit or rubric, it will answer the question. This final slide is just an overview of the structure of a conceptual essay. So you can see at the very top, we've got the question and thesis. So they're the two overarching things that drive everything else. And you can see that the question focuses where you're going to take your conceptual evidence, in the same way that in a journey, the origin determines which route you're going to take. The thesis is where you end up. So everything has to support that thesis. Every decision that you make needs to be made with the thesis in mind, thinking, how is that bringing me one step closer to my destination, to my thesis? And so you can see some of these terms that I've used earlier in this presentation starting to come through. We've got the conceptual evidence, which is what supports your thesis. And to support your conceptual evidence, you have concept statements, and these concept statements are then supported by textual evidence. We'll go through this in more detail in the following videos.